Okay, so perfect. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fourth episode of season 3 of our Vision of Intelligence Artificielle or VOILA seminars. As you know, seminars VOILA are our attempt and mission at the University Côte d'Azur, in particular with the organizations that organize and promote the VOILA seminars, which is FLIA Côte d'Azur, the French School of Artificial Intelligence, and my chair for economics of artificial intelligence and innovation, to promote a view of artificial intelligence challenges, evolutions, etc., that is inclusive, that is representing the many directions in which the technology evolves. So that covers things like AI and labor, and AI and data, AI and the economy in this case. So we touch upon topics that are of interest both for the social and the computer scientists, the humanities, and beyond. Today, we are very, very happy to have Lea Samek. I don't know if I pronounced or mispronounced your surname, Lea. Apologies for that. But Lea is, so Dr. Samek is a researcher and an economist at the OECD. And before she has been researching at several top-notch institutions. In particular, she's doing research on artificial intelligence and its adoption by firms and sectors within the Directorate for Science, Technology and Innovation at OECD. And today we're very happy to have Lea because she can indeed cover some of the fantastic work that has been done by OECD over the last years. And so the title of the presentation is How Do Firms and Sectors Engage with AI, Innovation, Skills, and Use? But the broad topic that we gave to the session is AI and the economy. As you know, VOILA, so a bit of house rules, VOILA works in a 1 hour and a half slot. So we have the talk by Lea for around 40 minutes, then we will have a bit of Q&A. In the meantime, if people have questions, you can post them in the chat, and then you will be called afterwards to either state your questions or we can read the question for you. Then we will have a sort of a second phase in which we have two panelists that engage with the topic. And the two panelists should appear here are Professor Ulrike Meyerhofer, that is professor of international business at the Institute of Management or GRM Laboratory at the Université Côte d'Azur. And Dr. Frank Michel, who is a research engineer at INRIA. So we have Lea, who is an economist, an expert of economic dynamics, Ulrike, who is an expert of business dynamics and internationalization, and Frank, who is a technical role, but has been working recently on the topic of attention markets and so on and so forth. So we will have two interventions from the panelists, and then more questions from the audience. Finally, so this is somehow the guidelines of what I said. The discussants have around 10 minutes each to make their points, which could be additional questions or elaborations and engaging with the topic. Lea is happy to record the event, so that's why we are recording. But just for transparency, if you participants are not happy to be in a recorded session, you always have the exit option to leave the room. But please don't leave the room and stay with us because it's going to be a very interesting talk. You also have the possibility to have real-time translations if your command of English is not perfect, and there is nothing bad with that. You can translate, especially in French. As I told you, questions can be posted in the chat and then will be read out loud later on. And before we start, the last thing is always to remind you that we have a website of VOILA that covers the current, previous, and future sessions. We have a YouTube channel where the videos are posted. VOILAs are useful for the PhD students because they can claim credits for that. And you can follow not only the member of the chair that are organizing VOILA, which is Ekaterina Predkova, and myself, Simone Vannuccini, but also Lucille Sassatelli, that is the director of FLIA, and the whole FLIA team on LinkedIn. Given that, I now stop sharing and I leave the floor to Lea. And thank you again for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. So let me start sharing the screen. I hope that you can see it now in full screen mode. Okay, perfect. Yeah, so thanks again for the introduction as well, the invitation and the thorough introduction. Yeah, as you were saying, so I'm going to present a bit of an overview of some of the work that we actually have currently ongoing at the OECD, including work that was recently published, and also, you know, hopefully touch upon some of the ongoing stuff that's not out yet. Now, I titled the presentation Innovation, Skills and Use simply because I struggled a little bit finding something or one overarching name for all of the different strands that we are doing. But you will see that I try to present a couple of papers that are actually in collaboration with a lot of colleagues, and I've listed them below here on the slides. But if you have any questions, feel free to contact me, and I can also forward some of the questions to the relevant colleagues. Now, let me see. Okay, now it's there's a slight delay in changing the slides, but no worries. So here you see a bit of an overview of some of the papers. So I added here some of the screenshots. So, you know, any kind of topic you think is more interesting and worth spending a bit more time on, please feel free to Google them and have a look. But what you will see is that we are working with a lot of different data sources at the OECD. So on the one hand, we have quite a few papers on human capital, where we leverage actually Lightcast data. Some of you may have heard about it before when it was called Burning Glass Technology Data, then MC Burning Glass, so they changed their names a couple of times. But basically, it's online vacancy text that we are leveraging here, and which usually provides quite a good proxy for AI adoption. And it also gives, very important, and you'll see I spent a bit of time on this in this presentation, a lot of information on the skills that are usually demanded by firms. Now, we also work a lot with IP data, so intellectual property rights data, where we leverage patent information and also trademark information. And this gives us an idea of the kind of inventions that are currently taking place in the field of AI. And then finally, we have some work going on where we look at web scraped data. In particular, here we are interested in company and also university websites that state to engage in AI activity. So either because, you know, they're offering AI related degrees, or because they are using AI as part of their core business function. Now, in today's presentation, I want to focus on some of our more recent work, in particularly where we try to combine either a number of different studies covering different countries, or also combining different indicators. And this is simply because a lot of the early work that happened in this kind of field, you know, was so new and innovative that very often data quality didn't allow to kind of expand across other countries. A lot of focus was on the US, or, you know, particularly focusing on let's say human capital. But in today's presentation, I try to give you a bit of an oversight how we try to leverage all of those different data sources together. And I'll focus particularly on the most recent work strands here, which not only featured in some of the working papers, but also actually in some of the flagship publications by the OECD, so the SDI Skills Outlook, for instance, and then also in some blogs. So now let me start by talking you through the skills section. So here, a particular focus on human capital. Now, digital technologies and, you know, AI in particular are, of course, the center of many policy debates at the moment. Everyone is talking about how AI can affect the growth and other outcomes of firms, and therefore also economies. There's a lot of debate as to whether AI is a general purpose technology or not. But one key issue that we found very early on is that, you know, any kind of research on AI adoption is very much limited, very often focusing on the US, and simply because in the past, you know, 3, 4, 5 years, there hasn't been a lot of data out there yet. But we know that as AI is adopted and as firms try to use AI more and more, they also need to change the way how their firms organize the production. You know, they need to change the kind of talent that they are looking for in order to develop and maintain AI. And so one solution is possibly to look at this online vacancy data set that I mentioned previously. I mean, there are other competitors out there. We here in particular work with Lightcast data. And so the idea here is to really look into the vacancy text and see what are the skills that employers are looking for. Now, there are different ways on how to leverage this information. Very often, the way how we have identified these jobs is actually through quite a conservative approach here. So one of the papers I want to spend a bit more time on is looking at the demand for AI jobs across 14 OECD countries, here covering the period 2019 to 2022. You know, the nice thing with this kind of lightcast data is that actually you can do web scraping on a daily basis. And so you could really see this afternoon, you know, what employers posted in the morning. But there's, of course, a slight time delay, just also because, you know, we are dealing here with publication deadlines and so on. But the idea here is that we really go through the text. We have a look at some of the skills that are mentioned in this text, particularly looking at some AI-related keywords. We have a list here of around 200 keywords that we keep on updating, and that's based on some other work, which I will go into detail a little bit later on. And we then want to see, okay, is this vacancy AI related or not, depending on the amount of AI related keywords and the type of keyword that's mentioned. So just to give you an example, when I was hired at the OECD, my job description mentioned AI. That doesn't mean that I'm developing AI. It just means that, you know, AI is one of the research areas I will work on. So these are the kind of jobs we do not want to tag in our job postings, right? These are just basically some of the noisy ones, also because AI is a big buzzword. Instead, we want to identify them based on generic or specific AI-related skills. And the way how we are doing it is we say that a job vacancy needs to have at least 2 generic AI skills or 1 specific AI skill to be identified as an AI-related job. And the other issue that you need to overcome here sometimes is, of course, the language barrier. So we started with English keywords and then also went through all of the other languages that are needed for these 14 countries. Now, what do we find? So when we look at these 14 different countries, we actually see that AI vacancies still comprise less than 1% of all job vacancies. So this looks relatively small, but what we also see is that actually this number has been growing over time. And so if I go to an earlier study that we've done, where we use a slightly different definition to identify AI-related jobs, you see that there has been a huge increase over time, particularly for the US, and with a very, very stark increase starting in 2015. So this is a trend that, you know, it keeps on happening. Now, the next thing that we can do with this online vacancy data is we can actually look at where these kind of jobs are concentrated. So in which kind of sectors. Now, I don't think it's particularly surprising when you look at this here that the majority of those identified jobs are actually in industries such as professional activities, ICT, and manufacturing. But of course, you have some heterogeneity here across countries, which, you know, also has to do with the industry specification and specialization in these countries. Now we can also look at the occupations, right? Because we have information on the employer that is posting the job, but we also have information on the skills and the occupation that this employer is looking for. Now, here, to make it a bit tricky, we need to deal with different classification systems just because we are dealing with 14 different countries here. And so you see on the left-hand side, the classification for English-speaking countries, on the right-hand side, the one for European countries and non-UK. And what you see here is, again, that you have a very strong concentration among the professional occupations. So around, you know, 3/4 of them are actually in professionals. Now, let's zoom into the skills. Okay, so with this data, we looked at the kind of sectors. We see which kind of occupations are permeated by AI. Now let's get an understanding of the actual skills that are most sought after in these kind of AI-related jobs. And on the left-hand side, you see the demand for AI workers among those countries as a share of all vacancies that are posted. And you see that at the top, you have this green line, which is machine learning. Now, this is averaged across all countries. On the right-hand side, you see the geographical distribution of these different skills clusters. So we basically took the 200 individual AI skills and we grouped them to get a bit more insight on some of those groups. And what you see here, what I think is quite interesting, is on the one hand, you see something that's very consistent across all countries, like machine learning. AI is kind of like the buzz keyword that's, very frequently mentioned. But you also see autonomous driving, for instance. You also see robotics in there. And you see that here we have this kind of heterogeneity across countries, where you see in Sweden and in France, for instance, autonomous driving is actually much more frequently mentioned. And again, this has something to do with the industry specialization in those countries. Now, let's zoom into the US. One of the reasons why I think it's interesting to look into the US in a bit more detail is, on the one hand, the large majority of AI vacancies in our data is coming from the US. At the same time, in terms of data quality, it's at the time we did the analysis, it was by far the best. And what we can do here is we can look, kind of zoom out. We are no longer looking at these individual skill clusters, but at individual skills. So the underlying keywords that I mentioned earlier. And we want to see now not only which ones are the most frequently demanded ones, but in what kind of bundles and groups are they most frequently demanded, okay? And so what you can see here is that actually a lot of those skills are very much interrelated. But you see, not necessarily in this graph, but in the paper, that actually these skill bundles also became much more interrelated over time, which means that, it's no longer enough to have just programming languages. You really need to have programming languages with data analysis and data science and so on. Now, one kind of skill which is really at the core of those bundles is neural networks. So that's one of the most central nodes in this online vacancy text data. But we also have a bundle that's more related to kind of the development of AI technologies. So that you see here, this in blue. We have another bundle, and these two bundles are really connected through the neural network node, which is more related to AI applications. Then you have a bundle that's related to robotics, and one that's related to more of kind of like the support functions, software, which is probably more about programming languages. Now, if we now no longer want to look just at AI skills, but actually look at the whole talent profile that firms are requiring from their AI talent, then here in this network, you see the top 30 skills in these identified AI-related jobs. And what's interesting is that actually many of them, they kind of relate to the tools of the job. So again, you have Python very much at the center, SQL, so programming languages. But you also see a lot of more socio-emotional related skills that pop up. And in particular, here you see something, about programming and software, management of big data, data analysis, and then here in the corner, the communication skills, teamwork skills, and so on. So it's really not enough just to have these technical skills. But now let's move to something else, a little bit zooming in on some particular AI employers. Okay, so now I hope I could give you a very quick, very brief idea of the kind of skills that are usually demanded, that make up the kind of talent profile of AI workers in AI firms more generally. But now, if we want to look at some of the top AI employers, so the idea was a little bit, that a lot of those trends are, of course, driven by the firms that hire most of the AI talent, right? And to what extent do they differ compared to some of the other AI firms? So what we've done here is, and we actually did a number of used a number of different definitions here to identify top AI firms. We looked at the kind of number of AI-related workers. We looked at the share of AI-related workers. We looked at the share of AI-related workers within sectors, across sectors, and so on. But the findings are always very consistent. And while you don't really see a big difference here on the left-hand side when you look at technical skills, so whether you're a top AI hirer or just an AI firm, doesn't make much of a difference. But when you look at the socio-emotional and foundational skills, there you really see quite a big difference in terms of the leadership and the management skills, for instance, that are demanded by those firms. So it seems that if you are one of those leading US firms, you're hiring a lot of AI talent, you want this talent to be endowed with a number of different skills, okay? Not just the techie ones, but also socio-emotional and leadership and management skills. And that made us think, okay, let's now maybe look at managers in those firms, okay, in particular, because it could be that for some reason they just tend to focus on managers, maybe because, you know, they tend to hire many people. So of course you need to have managers possibly with a kind of know-how to manage the AI workers. But when we do this here, which you see on this slide in particular, you see that actually beyond the usual leadership and management skills that are demanded by those managers, innovation, problem solving, ethical standards and conduct, math skills, these are the ones that seem to pop up quite a lot, particularly among those top hiring firms. And I think what's interesting here is when you think about ethical standards and conduct in particular here is of course very relevant, given that AI systems have the potential to support and improve decision making and you know, perform kind of very complex analytical tasks. But at the same time, of course, they also pose unique challenges that are related to privacy, digital security, risk management, responsible business conduct, and so on. So this was something in particular we looked at. Now, let me see. I think the slide is hanging again. Is it working? Yes. Okay. So now let's kind of move away from skills. I hope that, you know, I gave you a bit of an overview on that. And now let's move on to innovation. So as I was saying, we're also working a lot with IP data. And, you know, I think looking at innovation in particular is very important in the context of AI, because of course, innovation such as, you know, improving the quality and kind of upgrading business processes and so on is really very often a key motivation for many firms to invest in advanced technologies such as AI. And so innovation is an important component when we try to provide a kind of more comprehensive picture of the digital transformation, especially when we focus on something so complex and multifaceted as AI. So what we've done here in our recent work is that we really try to get a better understanding of what AI technologies actually involve. And again, you know, as I mentioned very early on in the presentation, there's a lot of debate going on about AI, you know, whether it has good or bad employment implications and so on. But when we talk about it and we want to really understand what the impact of AI is on the economy and on the society as a whole, we need to have a very robust definition of what it is. And that's kind of becoming more and more complicated the more and more AI is embedded in multiple sectors. So what we've done here is we used patent data in particular to get an idea of what AI-related core technologies are. So in other words, what are the technologies and what are the applications that are really at the core of recent advancements in AI? So when we do this here, we are leveraging our patent data. Now, patent data or patents more generally are often a key measure of innovation output. And patents are also very often used in the academic and policy literature to analyze the patents and the implications of technological change. So even though it has some drawbacks, and I talk about this in a minute, it is a good starting point. Now, a lot of recent publications, they leverage the classification codes that are within those patents and that help to identify the inventions according to their technical content of the underlying patent. Now, the issue with that is that very often they actually fail to account for the complementary technologies that do not belong to the target search field. And so some of them, you know, might be closely related, like AI, but they may not necessarily be classified as AI. And so there's now more and more work going on which actually tries to combine these different approaches. Now, in our work stream, the way how we are doing it, we are also combining both, but on top of that, we are actually employing a machine learning technique to further identify those those AI-related patents. And I'm not going into too much detail here, but I'm happy to share the paper that our colleagues have been involved there. It's great because they leverage, scientific publications, algorithms, and so on. So very different kinds of sources to get an idea of the technologies. So now let me focus on the work where we've actually tried to kind of disentangle the core AI technologies from other applications. Now, AI-related patents here, they are identified using the approach in the aforementioned paper, where it relies basically on these keywords that we find in the patent abstract, and then also on these patent classification or cooperative patent classification codes, so these different classification codes that I just referred to. And then we get a list of AI keywords derived from this text mining approach by Barufaldi, which really looks into these scientific publications, algorithms, and so on. And we managed to tag AI patents based on those keywords in the classification. Now, the next step is we want to now basically look at the core AI patents. Okay, so we're not necessarily just interested in any AI patents, but the ones that have the most forward citation linkages. Now, the reason behind it is the following. To really get an idea of the technological impact that a given AI innovation may have for some other subsequent AI technological development, it's important to leverage the citation. So if you have let's say a patent B, it cites patent A, and here patent A represents kind of a piece of existing knowledge, then patent B will automatically build on this knowledge if it's citing patent A, right? And so with this, we can then actually use the counts of AI-related forward citations, and we can define the top. We did 1%. You can kind of play around with the threshold, which we've done. Again, didn't change much the overall findings, but you can then define the top 1% cited AI patents as core AI. Now, of course, here it's really important to kind of make sense of the citation window, because a patent that was filed 10 years ago automatically will have more citations than one that was just filed for last year. So we have to do some normalization. Again, you can kind of look at a 3-year patenting window or citation window, at a 5-year citation window. So there are different ways to play around with this, which didn't affect our findings, but it's just something important to bear in mind. Now, when we've done this, we can basically now, so we started with all AI patents, then we narrowed it down to our core AI patents, and then we look at the content of those patents by looking at the technologies that are mentioned in the abstract and the title of the patent. Now, as I was saying, there are of course always some caveats with using this kind of data, right? Of course, we are not claiming that we can capture any AI innovation, because not all innovation can be patented, of course. At the same time, it depends on what kind of jurisdiction you look at. In our case, we looked at the US, simply because the USPTO, so patenting office, is the one where you can actually patent and protect software, which is really important when you look at the field of AI. Other patent offices don't do that. But it also means, depending on what you look at, you're dealing with different patenting costs and so on. So, while we argue that this is a good proxy, it may not capture all patents sufficiently. Now, what we see is when we looked at the kind of trends over time, and here we looked at the period 2000 to 2018, we saw that actually more than 70% of AI-related patents have been cited by other patents. And among those, with our methodology that I just described, we almost identified 500 core AI patents between this period. Now, what's important is that you can see this really stark acceleration of patent activities, particularly in recent years, bearing in mind that here on the left-hand side, you see a log scale. Now, what we can also do is we can characterize some of those patents in a bit more detail. So what we've seen is, and I'm just showing you here the figure for the generality index, but there are different quality indicators which give you an idea about the generality, the scope, the originality of those patents. And what you see here is that actually core AI patterns, so the ones that are most cited, are much more general. So they are cited by patterns belonging to a wider range of fields, which might be an indication for it to be a general purpose technology in nature. We also see that it's much broader in technological scope. So you don't see this in this chart here, but in the paper. We also see that it's actually, these core AI patterns tend to be more original. So they rely on a much broader range of technology fields. And then we see that AI patterns, not necessarily core AI, but generally AI patterns, are much more radical. So they build up on technologies other than the ones that are classified in the patents itself. When we then look at the actual topics that are mentioned in those patterns, we see that here over time, I split it in different windows, but you see that general AI, robotics, computer and image vision, you have recognition and detection, they seem to consistently kind of pop up across this period here. Now, much more recently, you also see autonomous driving and deep learning that seem to have gained much more in significance. And then you have others like, chatbots, algorithms, speech-related things that are generally generally less relevant over time. And that made us think that, we started by looking at these individual topics, but what we really wanted to understand was how these topics or these themes within patterns are actually linked. So now let me show you this graph, and I hope it's not too daunting. Give me just one minute to explain it a little bit, what you actually see here. So in the previous word cloud, you basically saw the growing importance of some fields like autonomous driving, networks, and so on. And this often happened at the expense of some of the other domains over time. Now, if you want to gain a deeper insight into some of the specific fields that influence the trajectory of AI advancements, then it's necessary to really leverage the information that's provided in core AI patterns and also draw up on the insights that are supplied in their citing AI-related patterns. So we go beyond the top 1%. And so here you see citation networks where you can really illustrate visually the evolution and the flow of knowledge between these patterns. And you can kind of pinpoint possible convergence and intersections of the different fields. Now, in the figure here, you see the identified core AI patterns as a focal node, where we focus in particular on algorithm as one theme. And then you see the surrounding nodes here, in the networks, which are the ones that are citing algorithm-related topics. So this is now the focus on the left-hand side, okay? And basically the same applies to the right with recognition and detection-related AI patterns. Now, the edges, so the parts that are linking each of those focal nodes, are directed, and so they reflect kind of the flow of knowledge going from the core AI pattern, so here the algorithm one, to the citing AI pattern. And then you also have some color coding here, where each node is color coded by the AI pattern's main topic, and then the edges by the citing AI topics. So just to give you a bit of an overview here. And so what's interesting is that you really seem to see that, the core AI technologies here that we look at, so on the left-hand side, algorithm, on the right-hand side, recognition and detection, they seem to build on one another, okay? Now, I would like you to focus on the left-hand side, because here you have algorithms as the focal one with all of their AI-related citations. Now, here on the right-hand side, we basically turn it around, and what you see instead here is you have core AI patterns so any kind of AI-related pattern with algorithm-related citations, okay? And again, both are very, very colorful. So it really seems to kind of support this general purpose technology nature of AI. Now, these are algorithm-related patterns. If we now look at autonomous driving or at robotics, you see it's much less colorful. Instead, you really seem to see that these are the kind of AI core applications that seem to contribute to their own development. So you have autonomous driving related patterns at the focal point, and they seem to be cited mainly by autonomous driving related patterns. And the same applies to robotics. So you see very different kind of patterns happening here. Now, let me move away from innovation. So we now looked at skills, we now looked at innovation. Now let's move on to AI use and how we bring everything together. Now, the way how we are doing this is the following. So I don't want to spend too much time on this study here, but I think it's quite interesting what we've done here. So at the beginning, I told you that we are leveraging all these different individual data sources, but ideally we need to link it to get a more comprehensive view of everything. And so this is what we've done here in this particular study, where we try to combine the different commercial data sources that I just presented to you. So the Lightcast online vacancy data, also the innovation data. And then we also try to link all of this with yet another data source, which I didn't mention in more detail yet. But there was the Glass AI data that I mentioned very, very early on, I think was the first slide, where we look at the kind of company website information and university website information and to what extent they are having either AI-related courses at university, degrees, or kind of AI at the core of their business. And then we link all of this later on to Orbis data, so to firm financials. And the idea was here, mainly initially, to be very honest with you, we thought that this way we can kind of disentangle the firms. We see, you know, who is hiring AI talent, who of them is then also innovating in that field, who has this as a core AI business. And we thought that this Venn diagram that you see here below very much overlaps. But what we actually found is once we did all the different linking of those AI adopters, was actually that the sources are very much complementary. And in order to get a full picture, it was really important to use all of this information. Now, when we then linked this to our firm financial information, we were able to look at, you know, things like firm age, again, the sector information, the kind of productivity profile. And so I'm not going into too much detail here of the findings, but again, you know, please feel free to have a look at the paper, and I have some more slides at the back in the annex as well if you are interested. But when we've done this, and we did this just for the UK because it was kind of like a very novel experimental study, and to be very honest with you, it was very time consuming, very tedious, because all the matching was done based on firm names, website names, I mean, anything you can think of to help improve the matching rate a little bit as well. And so what we saw then here was that you can kind of disentangle the types of AI adopters by looking at the ones that are just kind of patenting and you know, filing for trademarks in the field of AI. So we call those the AI innovators. Then we have the ones where we use the Glass AI, the web scraping data, which we call the firms that have AI at the core of their business, and then the AI talent, which is based on the online vacancy data. And so what you see is that actually AI adopters, they engaged who engaged in AI core business and also in AI innovation are much more concentrated in ICT. And then you have a much larger proportion of AI innovators that are active in manufacturing compared to the other firms. Now, we also saw that actually AI adopters belong to the group of AI talent are instead much more spread across sectors. And again, this could be a bit of a support for the idea that AI is in fact a general purpose technology. But then we also, when we linked it to the productivity information in Orbis, we saw that AI adopters tend to be much more productive. They tend to be much larger than other firms. We saw that young firms or young adopters, they tend to hire more AI workers intensively. And so we could get an idea through the Lightcast data also on the human capital part. And by linking the human capital part to the firm productivity information, we saw, you know, not surprising that, of course, human capital is very important, not just for the decision to adopt AI and use AI, but also for the productivity return. And there's some other work going on in the division, which is called AI Diffuse, where a harmonized code is distributed to different countries, and they run it on their side. The data is then sent to the OECD, And here you could really see that, you know, there is a productivity premium attached to the use of AI, but that's not necessarily because of the adoption of AI, but because of complementary assets that are there. So because of the skills that are there, because of the other technologies that are used and so on. So it's much more than just the adoption of AI. Now, let me kind of wrap up by giving you a brief insight on our latest work that we've done. Now, we talked a little bit about the kind of individual workers at firms. We looked at the firms. Now let's zoom out and let's look at the sectoral information that's provided. The idea here is a little bit the following. We've seen so far that, you know, it's important to look at these different kind of dimensions, different indicators, because AI adopters seem to vary quite across. But if you want to bring everything together, probably one single indicator does not really do the trick, right? And one of the reasons for it is, of course, because you may have some sectors that have, for instance, that are innovating a lot, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they are using AI a lot, right? Or the other way around. At the same time, you know, now there's a lot of literature going on around the AI exposure measure, particularly by Felton, where the argument is that maybe it's not so much the use, but the exposure to AI. So the potential to be, you know, replaced by AI, or to be for your task to be complemented by AI. Now, of course, you can have sectors like health, for instance, where, or in law, right, where technically the exposure is very high. So AI can be very, very useful, but there might be some boundaries, or, you know, that kind of prevent you from using AI much more. And so what we wanted to do here in this particular study was to bring all of this different information together at a sectoral level and create a taxonomy of AI intensity that can then be used for many other studies. And the idea was because we have our colleagues, they've done some earlier work on a digital taxonomy, which was widely used and you know, very, very useful to kind of allocate sectors depending on their digital intensity. Now, what we've done here is we wanted to look at AI human capital in particular, at AI innovation, and at AI use, so the actual use using some firm survey information. But we also wanted to look at AI exposure, so this famous Felton measure. But what I just said earlier was that, you know, there might be some sectors like health that is, you know, highly exposed to AI, but then you don't really see a lot of use of AI in that sector. And why is this the case? And we argue that there are many kind of barriers that might prevent the use of AI in those sectors. And so maybe it's important to adjust this AI exposure by those constraints. And so we call this the barrier adjusted AI exposure. And I talk about this in a bit more detail when I get to this particular indicator. But now let's focus on our human capital indicator, okay? So as you can imagine here, we used our online vacancy data. And here the idea is that if a firm wants to use and maintain AI, then very likely they will need the human input to develop and sustain this technology. And so this should be reflected in the online vacancy. And therefore, we looked at the text in particular here, and what you see on the left-hand side is the average share of AI-related online vacancies by sector across 4 English-speaking countries. So we restricted this to our 4 countries for which we know that the data quality is the best and coverage is great. And so what you see here is that the most AI-intensive sectors are, in fact, manufacturing of computer electronics, IT services, and scientific R&D, which I think is no surprise. But when we later compare the different indicators, you will see that there are actually quite some differences. Now, the second indicator is AI innovation. Now, for AI innovation, we looked at the patent data that I mentioned early on, where, you know, I showed you the different kind of network graphs. And what you see here is actually that you have IT services and media that are by far the most AI intensive sectors. Okay, so they really differ a lot compared to all the other ones when it comes to their patenting activity. And then you have others, which are much lower. You have telecommunications and computer electronics, which are of course also very important when you look at the ranking, but not so much when it comes to the actual patenting activity. Now let me spend 2 or 3 minutes on the barrier adjusted AI exposure, because this is where we did most of the tweaking, and maybe you need some convincing here, but let me give it a try. So more recent literature here has derived proxy measures to assess the degree to which specific occupations are likely to kind of overlap with tasks that AI can perform. Okay, so this is this Felton AI exposure measure. And usually this is done at the occupational level. But of course, once you have it at the occupational level, you can basically imply that and use the kind of composition of occupations and arrive at the sector level, which is what we've done. And so it really should reflect the potential for AI to be integrated into occupations in those sectors based on the tasks that these occupations usually involve. Now, as I was saying very early on, there can be some sectorial characteristics that create certain barriers to the use of AI. And therefore, they should then kind of hinder the actual use, even though exposure is high. And so what we've done here is we used information from the Business Trends and Outlook survey from the US Census Bureau, which asked questions to firms about whether they are using AI or not and why they may not use AI. And so they basically came up with some particular barriers such as cost and maturity. So this is really related to kind of the financial expenses and the developmental stage of AI technology that can be a barrier. You have operational and skills barriers. So here really kind of the insufficient knowledge about AI capabilities or the shortage of skilled personnel or, inadequate data. And then you have something that we call regulatory and ethical barriers, which is really about the privacy and the security concerns. And so all of these should create some kind of bias when it comes to the exposure measure. And so the relative rankings for these barriers here, they will then offer some kind of policy relevant insights into the specific obstacles that firms may encounter in kind of integrating AI into their operations and professional and scientific services and finance and insurance. Are some examples that were particularly high when it came to those barriers, even though there we do see high exposure and very often high use. So what we've done is we basically took those barriers and we rescaled the relative AI exposure measure by Felton to derive at this barrier adjusted AI exposure. So I hope this is a lot to digest, but this is kind of like the idea behind it, because we wanted to get something that's slightly more realistic to the real AI use. And so what you see here is a bit of an example of the kind of adjustment that we've done, where you see the ranking. So you have the kind of darker blue, which is the original Felton measure, and then you have our adjusted measure, which is the paler blue. And so what you see is that once we account for these barriers, you have IT services, which were high at the beginning, they remain very high. But then you also have finance and insurance, which shifted downwards. So you saw that here it was initially very high, but downgraded a little bit. So it moved further to the left, which simply reflects the issue of kind of privacy and ethical concerns. And then finally, you have publishing and broadcasting, which we generally call media, which actually shifted upwards in the ranking. And so these look like small shifts, but actually they are relatively big, and you do see some changes happening here when you really have the two exposure measures next to each other. Now, let me complete this part of the taxonomy with the AI use measure. And so, with the vacancy data and the patent data, and we kind of got an idea of the human capital and innovation aspect, but we don't really know yet what the actual use is. So what we did here is we looked at the kind of ICT use surveys that are published by Eurostat, and we looked at the number of firms as a share of all firms that reported to use AI in the most recent surveys. And so what you see here is that IT services and scientific and R&D really seem to stand out as some of the most AI intensive sectors in terms of use. Now, you may wonder how this looks like for generative AI, because one thing I need to state here very clearly is that, a lot of the data sources that we worked with was really prior to the boom of ChatGPT. So usually this is not taken into account. We are right now actually working on a literature review that's looking at experiments, looking at the effect of generative AI on entrepreneurship, productivity, and innovation. But this is not taken into account here. However, Canada actually has a more recent use survey where they asked about generative AI and to what extent firms are using that. And to our surprise, maybe not so much to yours, I don't know, the numbers were very similar. And, of course, it also depends on who is kind of completing these surveys, but it didn't really seem to make such a big difference as to whether the question was about generative AI or more kind of a predictive AI tool. And so now let me kind of bring this all together, okay? So the idea was really to have a taxonomy where you can have a quick look and see, okay, where is AI intensity the highest in which sectors, and also for which indicator, for which dimension here. And so what you see here is generally that media, telecommunications, and IT services, they really rank consistently at the top across all of these different indicators. Generally, manufacturing sectors fall kind of into the lower quartiles when you rank the AI intensity, with the big exception of computer and electronics. Now, maybe just to add something here, you do have some sectors like, let's say, construction, right? Or also the kind of production of machinery and equipment, where you may wonder, okay, are these kind of sectors that are falling behind, or are they just structurally different, right? And if you take the example of construction, I would argue that, this is a sector where probably AI can be very helpful when it comes to managing resources, planning staffing, and so on, but probably not so much when it comes to pouring concrete, right? So we're not making the argument that these are sectors that are falling behind, but some of them just structurally are different. At the same time, there can be some that where, when it comes to pharmaceuticals, for instance, and you look at the innovation where maybe something needs to be done. Now, this kind of taxonomy is really supposed to be kind of an operational tool where actually all of these 4 different indicators could also be combined. Now, of course, if you do that, and we have this in the paper, you will mask quite a lot of heterogeneity, like pharmaceuticals, right? This way you see, okay, it's very high in human capital, not so high in innovation. And so it's up to the user to kind of decide how they want to use this information. Now, as I mentioned very early on, there was also a paper on digital intensity, which is a bit kind of the idea where we got this from for the AI taxonomy. When you compare and contrast the AI versus the digital intensive sectors that we've identified, it's actually quite interesting because there are some sectors that are very much overlapping, but there are also a lot of differences that emerge. And so these findings here, they kind of challenge the notion that digital transformation and AI adoption always go hand in hand. Now, there are, of course, there's clearly a relationship, and, I wouldn't argue that. So if we take the example of construction that I just mentioned earlier, it exhibits very low levels in both taxonomies. But the analysis also shows that being digitally advanced does not shows that being digitally advanced does not automatically translate into AI leadership. So you can have manufacturing of transport equipment, which is very high when it comes to the digital intensity measure, but it's actually much lower when it comes to our AI measure here, particularly when we look at patenting and AI exposure. And something very similar is the case when you look at manufacturing of wood and paper, for instance. So this would suggest that AI diffusion might have kind of its own characterizing features and requires its own distinct strategies and capabilities, which need to be taken into account when we talk about, the digital transformation. So now I feel like I kind of, gave you a lot of information to digest. Really, I think it was quite difficult to give you a summary of everything we are doing. But hopefully this is just a bit of a teaser, and I'm happy to share any of the underlying publications or anything else that's currently going on at the OECD. But I think one of the main points I wanted to give you here is that it's really important to leverage the different kind of data sources. So it's not enough to just focus on skills and look at online vacancy data or just at patenting if you want to get a broader or more comprehensive picture of AI adopters and what's going on when we talk about the AI diffusion here. Now, you saw that there is some significant heterogeneity in terms of the countries that you look at, in terms of the sectors, and also the different indicators. You saw that, generally there's some similarity when we look at AI and then other ICTs. So when we compare everything to the digital intensive or intensity taxonomy, but there are also some quite significant differences. And so hopefully this taxonomy, so this last paper that I just presented, gives a bit of an overview and should be very useful for kind of policymakers to get basically better informed decisions. But we, of course, we do not claim that we kind of capture all facets here. As I was saying earlier, even if you just look at one indicator, when we talk about innovation, just looking at patents is unlikely to kind of capture all of the innovation that's going on in the field of AI. But it's a good proxy. And so I stop here. Happy to answer any questions and start the Q&A.
Thanks a lot, Lea. That's I mean, the diffusion and the implementation and adoption of AI across the economy is very complex, but you provided us quite a mapping. So, and now we are also up to speed with everything the OECD has ever done on AI. So that's fantastic. Thanks a lot again. I would open the floor for one question from the audience, if there is, and then we switch to the panelists. If instead people want to think through and digest, we can directly shift to the panel discussion, but I would give you 2 seconds to think. I also have several questions, but I will keep my chair rights for later. No, okay, then. So if people are still thinking about the topic to discuss, we will open the Q&A later as well. Then I will, I mean, there is not really a structural break, but we can go on with the panel. So we have Ulrike and Frank. I would ask in turn the two of you to intervene. So Ulrike first, I would suggest.
Okay, so thank you very much to Lucille, Katharina, and Simone for inviting me, and thanks to Lea for sharing all this rich data. So I'm Ulrike Meyerhofer. I'm a scholar in management, and so I would like to share some thoughts, some insights from the management field about AI, and in particular ask this question: how can companies use AI in their organizational processes? We have seen in the presentation of Lea that there is important sectoral differences and how AI is used. And so I would, as a management scholar, I would like to share some insights more at the management level. So I would like first to refer to global survey conducted on AI, conducted by McKinsey, which has just been published a few days ago. And this survey shows that today there is 78% of companies who use AI in at least one business function. So this survey has been conducted in more than 100 countries with 1,500 companies. And so it shows the rapid increase concerning the use of AI by organizations. It's a very strong increase within 1 year. And also, and if we compare the use of AI to generative AI, generative AI's the use is even increasing more faster, from 33 to 71%. So we can see that AI is transforming organizations very rapidly, but companies can have multiple benefits from AI, but they need to use AI in an appropriate way. And this can sometimes be challenging. So also this study by McKinsey shows that larger companies for the moment show a higher increase in terms of usage of AI than smaller organizations. And so actually I would like to, so this survey also shows that certain business functions, so it's similar to what Lea shared with us in terms of sectors, we can also see within the organizations and companies that AI is more used for certain business functions than for others. And the most used, the business functions that is ranks highest in terms of use of AI is marketing and sales. Also quite high is the use of AI for product and service development, knowledge management, innovation, IT, of course, but less, if we look at the recent statistics, AI is less used in human resources, in strategy, corporate finance, supply chain, and manufacturing. So there is quite an important gap, I would say, between the different business functions for which companies use AI. And so I would like to share some thoughts about how companies can benefit from AI. So of course, the first step is to know which AI tools can be applied to different organizational tasks. So companies also need to learn about that and be familiar with the latest tools. When we look at some of the AI tools that are currently used by companies, so I looked at the recent research conducted in the management field. So AI is very powerful for establishing profiles of customers, profiles of competitors, conducting segmentation of industries, segmentations of different stakeholders. Companies also use chatbots because they allow a 24/7 support to them and to interact with their stakeholders, their customers, their suppliers. AI is able, there is powerful AI tools that can provide personalized recommendations according to the different customer profiles. AI can also help companies in pricing, in real-time pricing, in processing orders, and also generative AI can now also provide some emotional support because it can interpret also facial expression and emotions. So AI can be used for developing and elaborating strategies, also for prototyping to meet customer expectations. So there is actually multiple tools, and then according, of course, to the sectors and the corporate size, companies then can choose between the different tools. And then the second question is how can they integrate these tools into their organizational processes? So AI is actually analyzing amounts of structured and unstructured data, and that can be very helpful for companies. It can establish personalized content, sometimes even develop the first contact with stakeholders. AI can also provide targeted solutions to customers. It can elaborate prototypes. It can also help companies to receive feedback, to help also people in companies to receive feedback on their work. It can help employees to negotiate with multiple stakeholders, and AI can also help in follow-up processes. So companies can actually win a lot of time when they use AI for certain tasks, and it can really help them also for their communication and also for their provisions. But what we can see from the current management literature is that to create value, because company work is a lot about value creation for customers, but also for different other stakeholders. And this management literature shows that how important it is to combine artificial with human intelligence. So that companies actually can really create value, because AI offers multiple benefits, but there is also risks. And so to optimize this value creation, it is important to combine artificial and human intelligence. It means that companies need to invest in training employees so that they can actually interpret also the data provided, the vast amounts of data provided by AI, so that they can also detect and identify inconsistencies, because there may be mistakes and that can be also detrimental to business activities. Human intelligence needs to monitor the contents generated by AI, needs also to interact and respond to more complex questions. Also, the emotional side can be important, and so to really create value and employ AI in an efficient way, it is necessary that companies are also aware of the risks associated with AI, and that they combine the artificial skills with the human skills. So these are some insights from the management literature on this topic.
Thanks a lot, Ulrike. I mean, we are going really from the macro to the meso to the micro to the nano of the adoption of AI. So I think this is so we treasure that, and then after the second intervention, Lea, if you want, you will be able to elaborate on this point. But indeed, so there is a world of use cases, sometimes theoretical, sometimes practical, that so sometimes not really realized yet, but that are possible and that are heterogeneously distributed across industries. So we can elaborate on that further. Thanks a lot, Ulrike, very much. And Frank, then your contribution to the discussion.
Thank you, Simone. Thank you, Lea. This is really a very interesting and unusual talk, at least unusual for me from the computer science. I'm not so much aware of how things are going on in terms of how AI penetrates companies, and your work is very impressive, dense, comprehensive, with lots of unique insights. So really thank you for that. And by the way, I've had an occasion to browse the document you referred to at the end, which is this sectoral taxonomy, and I really invite everybody to browse it, because there are lots of very impressive insights. So yeah, and I would like to continue on this one, because this sectoral taxonomy, this work is really intended to, say, help decision making and to steer policies. So we can imagine lots of types of work that would derive from this study. If you're more on the side of the industry and a promoter of AI, you would say we could steer policies to amplify it and promote the development of adoption of AI in different economic sectors. You could also think about steering policies in terms of anticipating the social impacts of AI. That is, how much job is going to be replaced or partially replaced by AI tools, and how we need to deal with that. So I think that's also very important perspective to keep in the focus. One other lead that I can think of, and it's not really mentioned in this report, but it could be interesting, is to see how this work could lead the questioning of potential harms of AI and how to steer works in this respect. So what I mean, if that you propose the sectoral taxonomy of AI intensity by sectors, and we could think of a sectoral taxonomy of potential AI harms. You mentioned that the work on studying the job offers with different keywords and so on. So I was feeling like we could extend this study, or maybe you've done it already, by the way, you will say that, with trying to search keywords that are more focused on having people that are well equipped and well equipped to work around AI biases typically. So I wonder if this is one of the key terms that you found in the job offers. You mentioned the case of recruitment for managers, and there was quite some focus on human qualities, but also I don't remember exactly how this was worded, but about gender equality and all this kind of stuff, which are not particularly fashionable right now, or very lately, I would say, with the new US administration, but still we need to keep focusing on that very much. I can think also of the European Union's AI Act that seeks to regulate the providers of AI systems, and it classifies the applications by risk of causing harm. There are 4 levels of risk, which are unacceptable, high risk, limited, or minimal risk. So I'm wondering how all of these reflections and questioning about AI harms can intersect with this work that you have done presently. And maybe if you can tell us about the existing works that you have at OECD in this respect.
Thank you very much, Frank. That's a further complementary direction. And if I may borrow, so I also, one of my questions was indeed like, where is the research going then at OECD after that? I mean, on the scope that you can say, Lea, in a sense, but these dimensions that Frank raised are indeed important, given especially what is happening in the discussion on the values that we are giving up, even the technological sovereignty issues, and which Frank didn't mention, but in the end there is a whole set of aspects that go beyond the pure just adoption technically. So Lea, then the floor is back to you if you want to reply to both the panelists' very interesting insights, and then we have still a bit of room for questions.
Yes, thank you very much for these comments and thoughts. I try to be as brief as I can be, but I think Ulrike, first of all, I mean, thank you for the insights about this McKinsey report. I've been following the previous ones a little bit. And I think what's quite interesting and same time striking is, you know, we've been involved in a literature review right now on generative AI, where we focus very specifically on experimental studies. So of course it's very, you know, context specific, and I wouldn't want to generalize any of those findings. But one thing that always comes up there is that, of course, you know, there is experimental evidence that really has highlighted the gains from generative AI across the board and any kind of field you look at. But there are these challenges that remain. So for instance, you know, one thing that really comes out is that the context needs to be considered and the user expertise needs to be considered. So we need to know how it's applied, by whom, what the purpose is of generative AI. We've seen that, you know, the fear of potential misuse, the lack of trust is one big barrier here. And, understanding the limitations is very important. And so what these studies have shown is, and we looked here in particular at productivity impacts, also innovation, so any kind of innovation. So we looked at, creative writing, organizational restructuring, and so on. So really try to look at different outcomes here. And what we've seen is that generally less experienced users benefited most from the use of generative AI, but only when the kind of tasks were really specific and kind of well-defined and bounded. Now, when we looked at kind of more experienced, particularly more task experienced people, individuals, workers, students, and so on, then we've seen that here the evidence was a bit mixed. So on the one hand, you see this productivity gain, you see, better teamwork skills and so on. But at the same time, you very often saw the issue of lack of trust, where actually individuals felt like their output was of higher quality than the output generated by AI. And so because of the lack of trust, very often it was actually not used. Or very often, the output was perceived as very valuable and of high quality. And once it was disclosed that actually AI generated it, then the kind of judgment changed. And so, I just want to echo that a lot of the experimental evidence that's very, very recent in the last year or so kind of supports exactly what you were saying. So thank you for that. Now, Frank, in terms of your comment about kind of the more ethical consideration, I would say. So within our division, we only looked into it slightly, mainly because of the results that we saw when we looked at managers and how, the kind of ethical conduct kind of popped up as one of the kind of skills that was highly demanded. And so we looked at some ethical related keywords in the vacancy text. And back then when we did it, we were actually surprised that the share of vacancies that were mentioning it was very low. And so, back then we kind of stopped it. It wasn't really part of the project anyway. It was just something that was driven by curiosity. But I would like to refer you to the work that our colleagues are doing in the digital division, where they looked into AI principles. And so I think this kind of goes in line with what you had in mind. They're not looking at, online vacancies in particular, or, there's no taxonomy, but I think this goes exactly in the direction that you were saying. But either way, I think it's really interesting and something I'll definitely discuss with our team as well. Now, Simone, in terms of your comment, where our work is going to. So I mentioned the generative AI work. So ideally, we would like to kind of now branch out, especially with more recent data, and look at generative AI in particular, and kind of the adoption patterns there, as well as the kind of productivity profiles that we can see here. And the other thing is that we want to get a better understanding of some of the workforce composition, and as well as, kind of going hand in hand with what you said, Ulrike, the organizational structural impact that AI adoption has. And one reason here is that, by looking at the online vacancy data, it's nice, but first of all, it's basically just giving you an idea of the human capital flow, not the stock, and it gives you an idea of the demand, but not the supply. And so by having an idea of the workforce composition that's currently within firms, I think, we can complement that work strand very well.
Thank you very much. Fantastic. Thanks, Lea, and also our panelists. I see there are some comments in the chat, so I don't know if people wants to take up on that. There is a comment by Isabel, and there is a comment by Ekaterina. So I don't know if you want to say anything about this.
I can say, but I think I would say Isabel goes first. She was earlier than me, so.
Yeah, hello everybody. If I compare what you said, Lea, and what you said, Ulrike, I'm a bit lost, because we are not. You are both talking about adoption of AI, but you don't have the same results, and I would like to understand why. I know why, but I would like to understand why there is different approach to this subject.
Thank you. I don't know if Lea, you want to react on that, and then Ulrike as well.
Yes, sure. So I think that there are a couple of reasons which can explain this. Now, I think so first of all, the ICT surveys that we are using, there's quite a delay in reporting. And if you see the kind of trend happening now over time, you see this acceleration happening. So I would say that the kind of numbers that we have probably on the kind of conservative side, and also kind of prior to the generative AI boom. So in our data, anything related to ChatGPT is not reflected at all. And then, of course, we are talking here about kind of averages across years, across different countries, and you do see a lot of heterogeneity here. So that's kind of like the quick answer.
Thank you. Well, I mean, Ulrike, if you want to top on that, but I think it's indeed Lea gave the explanation why. Then Ekaterina.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. It was very interesting discussion between the presenter and the discussants. So I work on, if not similar, if not the same, but similar, even using the same data, studying the labor effects of digital technologies, including AI, but not limited to it. And what I commented there is that I just linked the paper where we create the exposure measure and we cite Felten. We spoke with Felten and Siemens directly, and we compare our measure with theirs, saying like where there is overlap and why there might be discrepancies or differences between the two. So, I mean, that work is already in more advanced than what I linked, but in case if Julia you are interested in this work, we can engage further and I can send you an updated version of it, because in the updated version we have additional analysis on complementarities between technologies, and we see the effects of technologies are sometimes very difficult to detect in isolation, and they kind of one absorbs the effects of other produced by others, and that's why taking into account complementarities between technologies actually produces more accurate picture. And yeah, so that in AI, you consider AI from multiple perspectives, indeed, from intensity, from use and relevance to skills inside occupations. In our exposure metric, we also consider the relevance of different technologies, including AI, to the production processes and the products or services that are provided. So that's the basis for the exposure measure to sectoral classification. But in general, another dimension was to highlight is complementarities between technologies. But it's a big work, and what you are doing is even bigger work, gigantic work. So we might engage just of the seminar, but wanted to highlight these dimensions. Thank you again.
Thank you. If I may jump in, Simone, just quickly.
Please.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm aware of your paper that you just linked. Thank you. But it would be great if you can share the follow-up with us, because I think exactly this kind of complementarity angle is another work stream that we are working on as part of this AI diffuse and digital diffuse work stream that I mentioned briefly, where we share the harmonized codes with other countries. Because one thing that we see is the importance of complementary assets in terms of other technologies, skills, training, and so on. So it would be great to have a look at your exposure measure, which takes the complementary technologies into account.
Thanks. I will for sure. We also did the same for US, and we do comparison between US and European countries. So that's why that's like we're covering the regions of interest that you mentioned. You have the data for as well, and we work on measure of adoption using Lightcast data as well, like you do. So we certainly have synergies. So we keep in touch, and I'll write to you. Thank you.
Beautiful. Then we have a question from Flora.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for the very nice presentation. It is a big effort to produce useful new indicator on AI. I was interested on some specific facts that you showed, Lea. For instance, I saw that in what I wrote in the chat, in the AI-related job vacancies that you compare 2018 and 2022, what we saw is that it increased almost in every sector, except one. So I was curious. I noticed that in the R&D, scientific R&D, so they had quite a high level of job AI-related job vacancy, but at the same time, there is a decrease in this sector. So I was wondering if you, by chance, you have any explanation for that. And by contrast, the increase in pharmaceutical is really, really huge in this 4-year period. So the same, what is specifically going on? And if I can add something that I didn't have the time to write in the chat, is that for the AE Innovation Index, so the patenting activity, so I was surprised. I mean, I am not very expert in the field, but I was surprised to see the media coming out. Like, so also what is going on in this specific sector?
Yes, thank you. So when we, maybe I start with the human capital aspect, so with the vacancies. I mean, there are a couple of things. So we looked into this to see whether, you know, just one of the countries is possibly driving this. I have to say that it's, if I remember correctly, it's not just scientific R&D. I think we also have a decline when it comes to chemicals. So we do see this happening in other sectors as well. But I also need to highlight, of course, that we are talking here about very, very small shares as well, right? So even though we are taking the averages here across the years and also the, sorry, in this case, not the year because we are comparing two time points, but the countries, we are talking maybe about kind of a percentage point difference of 0.1 or so. So it looks like a lot, but it's exactly, I think, yes, exactly. So it's not a big deal, and it's something that you know, just some variation. We looked at some other years as well to see, and you know, you just, because it's, I mean, the other thing is we are dealing here with data that was not meant to be used for this kind of exercise, right? So it's online vacancy data that was scrapped from the internet, and so you do have some variation across time, across countries, and which is just the nature. So it's important here to look at not specific time points, but take averages, which is also, you know, what we've done for the final indicator. Now, the other question you had was about the patenting activity. So here I have to admit that I don't know. I will ask my colleague who worked on this. So she's producing. She's responsible for the microdata lab, and she's producing the patent data. But I'll have a look with her and see what happened there. It could be that just one year or one country is driving this, but it should be averaged out. So unfortunately, I can't give you much more insights into that.
Thank you. No problem. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot for all these very nice and useful questions and remarks. We are towards the end. I have only a question. Well, I mean, it's not really a question. I also do not want to advertise one of the AI companies, but I think to me it seems like the work that the OECD has been doing until now, not because of OECD choices, but mostly because how AI has been evolving. A lot of the findings that you have, they relate to what one could call like an industrial AI. So like the AI used as a process innovation somehow inside companies and firms. So the generative AI wave is really something qualitatively different. So this is the epitome of the commodification of AI, like let's say it's becoming a product rather than a process. But I don't know if you saw this economic index of Anthropic, where they used anonymized conversation with Claude to see what people chat and use AI for. And then it turns out, so why I said I do not want to advertise it, in a sense, I do not, it's not completely reliable, it's on a short time period, and the companies, they always have incentive to pursue their objectives, so you're not sure that they are fair in what they report, but somehow what you see is that the main use cases is coding. That's it. So the idea is just, is it something that in your opinion should be leveraged, should be combined with what you do? Does it paint a more narrow picture or a broader picture? If you were aware of that, if not, it's also not important, let's say.
Yes, so I'm aware of that. I have to say that when so far what we've seen when we looked into generative AI was different use cases, but everything very specific, right? So this is what I was saying earlier in terms of the context. Everything on generative AI right now is so context specific that it's really difficult to kind of get a feeling for its use. But from some of the like interviews that colleagues have been carried out, for instance, you do see that there is a wider use, particularly when it comes to text analysis. But for instance, within the OECD right now, we are having user groups where we meet regularly to discuss the use of generative AI within different international organizations as well, and how it is integrated. And now there are a lot of experiments happening where it is more integrated into kind of activities that have more to do with textual analysis, revision of text, summarizing of text, and so on. So I think we are just at the beginning right now, and I know that in the next kind of user surveys that are carried out, this will be discussed in more detail, and a lot of them now have questions on generative AI. But it's again some legs until we will see some of the results.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Lea. I just share for a second, if you see my final slide, because we were gonna conclude the session here. So I wanted just to say thanks to our speaker, Dr. Lea Samek, that gave us, I mean, now we know once again everything that your group at OECD is doing. So it sounds a little bit threatening, but we will keep checking what OECD is doing. No, in a very scientific way. Thanks a lot to Ulrike Meyerhofer and Frank Michel for their very insightful discussion. So this, I think, was a very productive, useful, and nice, and as usual, respectful voila. So here you have, once again, as a reminder, that you can follow Voila through the website, through YouTube, and in general, following what we post mostly on LinkedIn. That became the new platform, given the, as usually said in scientifically, the enshittification of other platforms like X. And given that, once again, Lea, for joining us with everybody else and everybody who wants to join us. We do not have yet a defined date for the next Voila, but keep following us and you will see the new appointment. And all of you have a very lovely rest of the day.